6,000 years ago, strange ships came down from the sky. They were huge and black, bigger than any mountain. The people of Earth watched with fear as these ships landed on their world. They had no weapons to fight. They had no machines to protect them. They only had stone tools and fire. The beings that came out of those ships were tall and terrible. Their skin was dark like the night sky. Their eyes glowed silver like the moon. They walked among the humans and laughed at what they saw. To them, humans were nothing. They were weak. They were stupid. They were like animals waiting to be used. These beings called themselves the. They ruled over 300 star systems. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. Every species they found became their slaves, and now they had found Earth. But they did not take the humans that day. The leader of the looked at the small villages and the simple people. He saw that there were not enough humans to be useful. They needed more, many more. So they made a decision. They would leave Earth alone. They would let the humans grow in number. They would let them multiply like animals in a field. And then, after many years, they would return. They would harvest the humans like crops and put them to work in the mines and factories of their empire. They marked Earth as a seed world, a world to be collected later. Then they flew away into the stars, laughing at the primitive creatures they had left behind. But the humans did not forget. They painted pictures of the ships on cave walls. They carved images into stone. They told stories around campfires, passing the warning from parent to child. Generation after generation, the memory lived on. The humans remembered the tall beings with silver eyes. They remembered the promise of return. And they swore that when that day came, they would be ready. 6,000 years passed. Empires rose and fell on Earth. Humans learned to build cities. They learned to make machines. They discovered electricity and computers. They split the atom and reached for the stars. They colonized the moon, then Mars, then the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. They spread across their solar system like wildfire. And through all of it, they never forgot. Every child learned the old stories. Every government kept the ancient warnings. Deep in secret bunkers, scientists worked on weapons that could fight the. They studied the old cave paintings. They analyzed the marks left behind by the alien ships. They prepared for a war that might never come. But it did come. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, the largest warship ever built by human hands. She was 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back tight and dark eyes that had seen too much. She had spent her whole life training for this moment. Her mother had trained before her, and her grandmother before that. The bridge was filled with officers working at glowing screens. The ship hummed with power. Outside the windows, the blackness of space stretched forever. They were stationed beyond Neptune, at the very edge of the solar system. Lieutenant looked up from his console. He was young, only 25, but his hands were steady and his voice was calm. He had been trained well. "Admiral," he said, "we are detecting hyperspace signatures, multiple contacts." Walked forward slowly. Her boots made no sound on the metal floor. "How many?" Checked his readings again. His face went pale. "Over 3,000, Admiral. They are coming out of hyperspace now." The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped working and looked up. 3,000 ships. It was more than they had expected, much more. Stood very still. She looked out the window at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, the fleet was appearing from nothing. Huge warships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons ready, their crews eager for conquest. They had returned, just as the old story said they would. "Sound the alarm," said quietly. "All stations battle ready. Inform Earth Command that contact has been made." Alarms began to ring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Soldiers ran to their positions. Pilots climbed into their fighters. The great engines of the Eternal Dawn roared to life. Across the solar system, other ships received the message. On Mars, Admiral Menu ordered his fleet to launch. On Europa, hidden bases opened their doors and released swarms of fighters. On Titan, massive powered up, ready to fire. Humanity had waited 6,000 years for this day. They had built their weapons in secret. They had trained their soldiers in silence. They had prepared for a war that most people thought would never come. But it had come, and they were ready. Admiral opened a channel to her fleet. Her voice went out to every ship, every station, every soldier waiting in the darkness of space. "This is Admiral," she said. "They have returned. 6,000 years ago they came to our world. They looked at our ancestors and saw nothing. They saw animals to be harvested, slaves to be collected." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They made a mistake. They gave us time, time to learn, time to grow, time to build. And now they will see what we have become." On the main screen, the first ships became visible. They were huge and black, just like the old paintings. Their hulls were covered with strange symbols. Their weapons glowed with deadly energy. But Admiral did not feel fear. She felt something else, something that had been building in humanity for 6,000 years. It was not anger, it was not hate, it was something deeper. It was determination. They expected to find sheep on Earth, simple creatures waiting to be taken. They expected an easy conquest, a quick harvest. They thought humans were still the primitive beings they had left behind so long ago. They were wrong. "All ships," Admiral commanded, "prepare for battle. Today we show the galaxy what humanity truly is. Today we keep the promise our ancestors made 6,000 years ago." The fleet moved forward into the darkness. Thousands of human warships, built with technology they could not imagine. Millions of soldiers, trained from birth to fight. A species that had spent 60 centuries preparing for this single moment. They had come to harvest. They would find only fire. High Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's pride. He was tall, even for a. His dark skin seemed to absorb the light around him. His silver eyes glowed bright with power and pride. He had conquered 20 worlds in his long life. He had crushed rebellions. He had destroyed entire civilizations. He was the greatest warrior in the Empire, and this mission was supposed to be simple. Collect the humans, put them in chains, take them back to the Empire as slaves. But when he looked at his, he did not see what he expected. "What is this?" growled, his deep voice filling the bridge. His second in command, a younger named, stood beside him, was nervous. He had seen the readings and he did not understand them. "High Commander," said carefully, "the humans appear to have developed." Developed turned to face him. They were animals 6,000 years ago. They lived in mud huts. They had no technology. They had nothing. "That is correct, High Commander, but," pointed at the screen, "look." Looked. Where he expected to see a primitive world, he saw something very different. The third planet from the sun, the one they called Earth, was surrounded by lights. Orbital stations floated in space, huge and gleaming. Ships moved between them in organized patterns. And it was not just Earth. The red planet Mars had cities under glass domes. The moons of the giant planets had bases and factories. Everywhere looked, he saw signs of civilization. "Impossible," he whispered. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the fleet. Thousands of human warships moved toward his invasion force. They were smaller than ships, but there were so many of them. They flew in perfect formation. Their weapons were already powered up. They looked ready to fight. "How many?" asked. Checked his console. "Over 4,000 warships, High Commander, plus fighters, plus defense platforms, plus..." He stopped talking, his silver eyes wide with shock. "Plus what?" "Plus weapons on their moons and planets, long-range cannons, missile systems. They have turned their entire star system into a fortress." Could not believe what he was hearing. These were supposed to be primitive creatures. They were supposed to bow down and accept their fate. That was how it always worked. That was how it had worked for 1,000 years. But these humans had not bowed down. They had prepared. "High Commander," an officer called out, "the humans are hailing us." Straightened his back. Whatever the humans had built, they were still just humans. They were still the weak creatures his ancestors had visited long ago. They could not possibly match the power of the Dominion. "Put them on screen," he commanded. The flickered, then a human face appeared. It was a female. She was old by human standards, with silver hair and dark eyes. She sat in a command chair surrounded by holographic displays. Behind her, officers worked at their stations. She looked calm. She looked confident. She looked like a warrior. "Fleet," the human said. "This is Admiral of the United Earth Defense Force. I am the commander of humanity's military forces." Studied her carefully. There was no fear in her eyes, no nervousness in her voice. She spoke as if she was his equal. "You visited our world 6,000 years ago," Admiral continued. "You marked us for enslavement. You thought we would be easy prey when you returned." She leaned forward slightly. "We remember." Laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through his bridge. "You remember? Impossible. Your species could barely speak 6,000 years ago. You had no written language. You had nothing but sticks and stones." "We had stories," replied. "We had paintings. We had carvings. We passed down the warning from generation to generation. And while we waited for you to return, we prepared." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "You have 1 hour to withdraw from our star system. If you do not leave, we will destroy you. There will be no second warning." Could not believe what he was hearing. This tiny creature, this human, was threatening him, the greatest commander in the Empire. It was absurd. It was laughable. 1 hour, he showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. "Little creature, we have conquered 1,000 worlds. Your species is nothing to us. Your defiance is amusing, but it is also meaningless." 59 minutes, said calmly. Then the screen went dark. Stood in silence for a long moment. His officers watched him nervously. No one had ever spoken to a high commander that way. No one had ever dared. "She is bluffing," finally said. "She knows she cannot defeat us. She is trying to scare us into leaving." Cleared his throat. "High Commander, I am not sure that is true. Our sensors show that their weapons are advanced." "How advanced?" "I cannot say exactly, but they are not what we expected. Some of their technology does not match anything in our databases. It is possible that they have developed weapons we have never seen before." Waved his hand dismissively. "It does not matter. We have 3,000 warships. We have the greatest military force in the galaxy. Nothing these humans have built can stop us." He turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare the fleet for attack. We will crush their defenses and take their world. Then we will put every last human in chains, just as we planned." The officers began working at their consoles. Orders went out to every ship in the fleet. Weapons powered up. Engines roared to life. The invasion was beginning. But deep in his heart felt something he had not felt in a very long time. It was a small feeling, easy to ignore, but it was there. It was doubt. The humans had known they were coming. They had prepared for thousands of years. They had built warships and weapons. They had turned their entire star system into a battlefield. What else had they done? What other surprises were waiting? Push these thoughts away. He was a high commander of the Dominion. He had never lost a battle. He would not lose this one. "Move the fleet forward," he ordered. "Show these humans what true power looks like." The armada began to advance. 3,000 warships, dark as night, moved toward the inner planets. They were confident. They were powerful. They had conquered 1,000 worlds and never known defeat. But somewhere ahead of them, Admiral was waiting, and she was smiling. They had given humanity 6,000 years to prepare. They were about to learn what a very bad mistake that was. The fleet moved through the outer solar system like a dark cloud. 3,000 warships, each one bigger than a human city, pushed toward the inner planets. They passed the ice giants Neptune and Uranus without stopping. They swept past the gas giant Jupiter without slowing down. High Commander was confident. His ships had destroyed entire civilizations. His warriors had conquered worlds that fought back with everything they had. These humans, no matter what they had built, could not stop him. But then his fleet reached Saturn, and everything changed. Commander Minu stood on the bridge of the Iron Will, watching the ships approach. He was 53 years old, with gray hair and a face covered in scars from battles long past. He had fought in the Mars uprising 20 years ago. He had commanded ships in the asteroid wars. He knew what it meant to face death and not look away. His third fleet was hiding behind Titan, Saturn's largest moon. 200 warships, quiet and dark, waiting for the right moment. On the surface of Titan itself, huge weapons were buried under the frozen ground. That could fire metal at incredible speeds. Missile silos filled with nuclear warheads, energy cannons that could cut through any armor. "The enemy is entering the kill zone," Lieutenant Sara reported. She was young, only 28, but her hands were steady on her console. 1,000 ships in the lead group. The rest are following behind. Minu nodded slowly. "Good, let them come deeper." The ships moved forward without caution. They did not expect an ambush. Why would they? They were the conquerors of 1,000 worlds. No one ambushed them. No one surprised them. They always attacked. They never defended. That confidence would cost them. "Now," Minu said quietly. The moon of Titan came alive. Doors opened on the frozen surface. Weapons rose from hidden bunkers. Targeting systems locked onto the ships. Then everything fired at once. Rounds shot through space at a fraction of the speed of light. They were simple weapons, just pieces of metal moving very fast, but they hit with incredible force. The first ship took a direct hit and exploded into a ball of fire. Then the second. Then the third. Missiles launched from hidden silos, their engines burning bright. They twisted through space, avoiding defensive fire, and slammed into enemy hulls. Nuclear explosions lit up the darkness like new suns. Energy cannons swept across the formation, cutting through shields that had never been tested against such power. Ships broke apart. Reactors overloaded. Escape pods launched in all directions. In the first 5 minutes, 100 ships were destroyed. High Commander watched from his flagship in shock. His silver eyes went wide. His dark hands gripped his command chair. "What is happening?" he demanded. "What are those weapons?" "Unknown technology," High Commander replied, his voice shaking. "Our shields are not holding against their projectiles. Their missiles are too fast for our defenses. Their energy weapons are burning through our armor." "Impossible," slammed his fist against his chair. "We have the greatest technology in the galaxy. Nothing can defeat us." But the numbers on his screen told a different story. 150 ships destroyed. 200, 250. And then the human fleet attacked. Commander Minu led his third fleet out from behind Titan. 200 warships, painted dark to blend with space, moved in perfect formation. They had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Every pilot, every gunner, every engineer had trained for years to fight the "All ships," Minu commanded, "engage the enemy. Show them what humans can do." The Iron Will opened fire. Its main cannons, massive weapons that ran the entire length of the ship, sent beams of pure energy into the formation. Other ships followed. Smaller weapons fired in perfect coordination, targeting weak points, hitting engines and weapon systems. Human fighters launched from carrier ships. They were small and fast, designed to slip through enemy defenses. Each pilot was the best of the best, trained since childhood to fly and fight. They dove into the formation like wolves among sheep. Lieutenant Sora watched the battle unfold on her screen. "They are not retreating, Commander. They are trying to regroup." Minyu nodded. "They still think they can win. They still think this is an easy harvest." He looked out the window at the explosions lighting up space. "They are wrong." The battle raged for hours. They fought back with everything they had. Their ships were bigger and their weapons were powerful. They destroyed many human ships. They killed many human soldiers. But for every human ship that fell, 3 ships were destroyed. The humans knew these waters. They had planned this battlefield for centuries. Every asteroid, every moon, every piece of space debris had been mapped and studied. They were fighting blind in enemy territory. When the Battle of Titan finally ended, they had lost 400 ships. Almost half of their lead group was gone. The frozen moon of Titan was surrounded by wreckage and bodies and the burning remains of an invasion force. High Commander retreated to a safe distance, his fleet in chaos. He had never experienced anything like this. He had never lost so many ships so quickly. "High Commander," said carefully, "perhaps we should consider withdrawal. We have lost too many ships. We cannot." "No," roared. "I will not retreat. I have never retreated. These humans are nothing. They got lucky, nothing more." But deep inside knew the truth. This was not luck. This was not an accident. The humans had prepared for this battle. They had known exactly where to fight. They had known exactly how to hurt his fleet. They had been waiting for him. On the Iron Will, Commander Minyu allowed himself a small smile. They had won the first real battle, but he knew this was only the beginning. "Report our losses," he ordered. 47 ships destroyed, Commander," Sora replied. 30 more damaged. We lost approximately 2,000 soldiers." Minyu closed his eyes for a moment. 2,000 lives. Good people who had given everything to protect their home. He would remember every single one of them. And the enemy. 412 ships confirmed destroyed, possibly more. Their fleet is retreating toward Jupiter. Minyu opened his eyes. They will come back. This was just the first wave. The real battle is still to come. He turned to face his bridge crew. They were tired. They were scared. But they were also proud. They had faced the greatest military force in the galaxy and they had won. "Get some rest," Minyu told them. "Repair what you can and prepare for the next fight." He looked out the window at the distant stars. "They gave us 6,000 years," he said quietly, "and we used every single day." While the battle raged in the outer solar system, something different was happening on Earth. In a great hall deep under the mountains of Korea, the Global Defense Council had gathered. These were the leaders of humanity. Presidents and generals, scientists and strategists. They sat in a circle, watching holographic displays that showed the war in space. But the most important person in the room was not a general or a president. He was a thin man with tired eyes and soft hands. His name was Director, and he led the archive. The archive was not a library. It was not a museum. It was something much more important. It was the collected memory of humanity's encounter with every cave painting, every carved stone, every ancient story that mentioned the visitors from the sky. For 6,000 years, the archive had collected and protected these memories. And for 6,000 years, the archive had helped humanity prepare. Director stood before the council. Behind him, a holographic display showed images that were very, very old. Cave paintings from France, stone carvings from China, ancient texts from Egypt and Mesopotamia. All of them showed the same thing. Huge ships coming down from the sky, tall beings with dark skin and glowing eyes. 6,000 years, said. His voice was quiet, but everyone listened. That is how long we have remembered. He touched a control and the display changed. Now it showed a timeline, stretching from the distant past to the present day. When the first came to Earth, we were nothing. We had no metal. We had no written language. We lived in small groups and fought each other with sticks and stones. He moved along the timeline. But we survived. We grew. We learned. We built empires and watched them fall. We discovered science and technology. We made terrible weapons and beautiful art. We did all of this while carrying a secret that most people never knew. The display showed images of secret meetings throughout history. Kings and priests, generals and scholars all gathered to discuss the same thing: the return of the. Every generation had its guardians, continued. People who knew the truth, who kept the memories alive, who prepared for the day when the sky would darken again. Council member raised her hand. She was an older woman, one of the most respected leaders on Earth. Director, this is all well known. Why are you telling us this now? Smiled slightly. Because many of you still do not understand. You think this war is about weapons and ships and soldiers. You think we are fighting because we have better technology than the expected. He shook his head. That is not why we will win. He changed the display again. Now it showed children sitting around a fire, listening to an old woman tell a story. The image was from 5,000 years ago, but it could have been from any time in human history. We will win because of this, said. Stories, memories, the promise that parents made to their children generation after generation. He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. They have conquered 1,000 worlds, but they have never faced a species like us. They have never faced a species that remembers. He let that sink in for a moment. When they conquered other worlds, those species forgot. They forgot their histories. They forgot their ancestors. They became slaves not just in body, but in mind. They accepted their fate because they could not remember a time when they were free. His voice grew stronger. But we remember everything. We remember our ancestors who first saw the ships. We remember the fear they felt. We remember the promise they made. And that promise has been passed down through 300 generations. Every human who has ever lived has carried that promise in their heart. On the display, the old image faded. It was replaced by scenes from the present. Children in schools learning about the soldiers in training, swearing to protect Earth. Scientists in laboratories working on weapons and defenses. We are not just fighting with ships and guns, said. We are fighting with 6,000 years of memory. Every soldier out there carries the weight of all our ancestors. Every pilot knows that they are keeping a promise made before written history began. He paused, taking a deep breath. They think this is a simple harvest. They think they can take what they want and leave, but they do not understand what they are facing. He turned to face the holographic display of the battle near Saturn. Human ships were pressing the attack. Ships were retreating. They are not facing an army, said. They are facing a memory, a promise, a species that has spent 6,000 years getting ready for this exact moment. He turned back to the council. We did not build these weapons out of fear. We built them out of determination. We did not train these soldiers out of hate. We trained them out of love. Love for our ancestors who first saw the danger. Love for our children who will live in freedom. Council member stood up slowly. Her eyes were bright with emotion. What would you have us do, Director? Smiled. Nothing different. The preparations are complete. The soldiers are fighting. The weapons are firing. He looked around the room one last time. I just wanted to remind you why we will win. It is not because we have better technology. It is not because we have more ships. It is because we are humanity. We remember. We prepare. We endure. He sat down in his chair, suddenly looking very tired. They gave us 6,000 years to get ready. They thought we would stay primitive. They thought we would forget, but they did not understand humans. He closed his eyes. We never forget, and we never give up. The council sat in silence for a long moment. On the displays around them, the battle continued. Human ships fought and died. Ships burned and fell. The fate of a species hung in the balance. But in that room, under the mountains of Earth, something had changed. The leaders of humanity understood now. This war was not just about survival. It was about keeping a promise. A promise made 6,000 years ago by ancestors who had looked up at strange ships in the sky and sworn that their children would be ready. Today, those children were fighting. And they would not lose. High Commander stood alone in his private chamber aboard the Dominion's Pride. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of a single. On that screen, numbers told a terrible story. In 3 days of fighting, he had lost half his fleet. 1,500 warships, destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Millions of soldiers, dead or captured. The greatest invasion force ever assembled, broken against a species that was supposed to be primitive. His hands shook with rage. In his entire life, he had never known defeat. He had conquered 20 worlds. He had crushed rebellions that seemed unstoppable. He had been called the greatest warrior in history. And now these humans, these insects, had humiliated him. How, he whispered to the empty room, how is this possible? The door opened behind him. Entered carefully, holding a data tablet. The young officer looked afraid and with good reason. Had already killed 3 officers who brought him bad news. High Commander said quietly, I have intercepted a human transmission. You should see it. Turned slowly. What kind of transmission? A morale broadcast for their soldiers. Waved his hand, show me. The changed. The numbers disappeared. In their place appeared a human face. It was a young woman dressed in a flight suit. Her name tag read. She could not have been more than 25 years old. Her face was round with youth, but her eyes were old. Very old. My grandmother told me stories, said. She was speaking to a group of other pilots, all of them young, all of them wearing the same flight suits. When I was small, she would hold me on her knee and tell me about the visitors. She smiled at the memory. Her grandmother had told her, and her grandmother before that. The story went all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to the first ones who saw the ships come down from the sky. The other pilots listened in silence. Some of them looked scared, some looked determined, all of them looked ready. Those first ones had nothing, continued. No weapons, no technology, no way to fight. When they flew back up into the stars, our ancestors could have given up. They could have accepted their fate. They could have forgotten. Her voice grew stronger. But they did not forget. They made a promise. They promised that their children would be ready, that there would be ready, that no matter how long it took, humans would be waiting when they returned. She reached up and touched something around her neck. It looked like a small stone, carved with ancient symbols. This belonged to my grandmother, said, and her grandmother before that. It is older than any nation on earth, older than any empire. It was carved by someone who saw the ships with their own eyes. She looked at the camera and felt something strange. It was as if she was looking directly at him. Today we keep the promise, said. Not because we hate not because we want revenge, but because we love our ancestors, we love our children, we love the future that they will have when this is over. She pulled on her flight helmet. We are the promise, she said. Every single one of us, every human who has ever lived, every human who will ever live. We are the promise that was made 6,000 years ago. She smiled, and it was a fierce smile, full of joy and determination. Let's go keep it. The screen went dark. Stood in silence for a long time, waited nervously, not daring to speak. Finally turned to face him. They are not fighting for territory, he said slowly. No, High Commander. They are not fighting for resources. No, High Commander. Then what? Demanded. What drives them? What makes them throw themselves into battle against impossible odds? What makes them fight as if nothing else matters? Swallowed hard. They are fighting for memory, High Commander, for 6,000 years of memory, For every ancestor who looked up at the stars and knew we would return. Stared at him. That is ridiculous. Memory cannot win battles. Stories cannot destroy warships. And yet, said quietly, they are winning. Turned back to the... He called up the battle recordings from the past 3 days. He watched human ships charge into impossible situations. He watched human pilots sacrifice themselves to protect their companions. He watched soldiers fight to the last breath, never surrendering, never giving up. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen anything like it. The species he had conquered before had fought hard at first, but when they realized they could not win, they broke. They surrendered. They accepted their fate and became slaves. But these humans did not break. Even when they were losing, even when their ships were destroyed and their friends were dying around them, they kept fighting. They seemed to draw strength from something he could not understand. Something inside them that refused to surrender. "What have we done?" whispered. Moved closer, High Commander. Looked at him with silver eyes that had lost their glow. 6,000 years ago, my ancestors came to this world. They looked at these creatures and saw nothing. They laughed at their primitive ways. They marked them for enslavement and left without a second thought. He shook his head slowly. They should have killed them all. For the first time in his long life, High Commander felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death, not fear of pain, but fear of something deeper. Fear of facing an enemy that could not be broken. Fear of fighting a species that had spent 6,000 years preparing for this exact moment. Fear of losing not just a battle, but something much more important. Fear of facing the promise of 300 generations. He straightened his back and tried to push the fear away. He was still a High Commander of the Dominion. He still had 1,500 warships. He could still win this war. But as he gave the order to prepare for another attack, he knew the truth. The humans were not afraid. And that terrified him.